Tim, we have this tradition here where we juxtapose principles of leadership, love in action against its counterpart, which is fear. And here we are in 2020, and fear is still prevalent in how organizations and businesses are managed.
Yeah.
But we keep finding evidence that the principles of love and care and inclusion and respect and autonomy and empathy, which are all principles of psychological safety, these things lead to high performance and business outcomes. So why do people still lead through fear and control?
And I hope that this pandemic is teaching people that that's not going to work. I think people continue to lead that way out of insecurity and out of arrogance, because here's what fear does. It's very simple. Fear, when someone pushes the fear button, it triggers what we call the self-censoring instinct. And we all have a self-censoring instinct. When that self-censoring instinct is activated, we retreat and we protect ourselves, and it changes our behavior. So to lead through fear is actually an abdication of leadership. You're actually not leading anymore. And it's actually a real cop-out. It means that you haven't invested in learning how to become a true leader, because you're fear relies on either coercion or manipulation instead of legitimate forms of influence. So you've abdicated your leadership as a leader. You're not leading anymore. That's just a cop-out. That's an easy way out. That's what you've done. Instead of stepping up to the plate and saying, I'm going to lead with pure motives. Because here's what humans understand. Humans have an innate capacity to smell and sense a person's motive. And if your motive is impure, if you're self-serving, then you're not going to pass the smell test as a leader. We're going to sniff you out. You can't fake us out. You might fake us out for a week or two, maybe a month, but that's it. And then we're on to you. And so you've got to bring pure motive to your leadership, so that we know that you care about us, that there's genuine interest and care and concern. And we can even use the term love, right? One of the things that I say in the book is that psychological safety is a form of industrialized love. That's what it is. So you must bring pure motive, or we're going to sniff you out.